get this committee hearing started. I want to welcome everybody to the Rules, Elections, Intergovernmental Relations, and Neighborhood Committee. It is Thursday, June 2nd. We do have a quorum. I'm joined by Mr. Jose Huizar and Mr. Marquise Harris-Dawson. Mr. Clerk, we do have a quorum. Why don't you read what's on the agenda and we'll begin.
Item number 1 is a joint city administrative officer and chief legislative analyst reports relative to governance reform of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and proposals for submitting amendments to the city charter to the voters in a ballot measure at the November 8th, 2016 elections and for making amendments to the Los Angeles Administrative Code.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to start off with, I'm going to ask the CAO, CLA, and Dr. Pickle to come forward. We want to get, we received a report, and I'd like for us to chat about that for a moment. And then, of course, as the hearing moves on, we'll be taking comments from the public. So who wants to start? Dr. Pickle?
Fred Pickle, Executive Director, Office of Public Accountability, Ratepayer Advocate. I will start with a presentation following up on requests by this committee to report back on strengthening the Office of Public Accountability. First slide. The committee asked us to report back in 3 areas. 1, options for strengthening the Office of Public Accountability, Ratepayer Advocate, as outlined in the April 5th report. 2nd, to provide options for making the office more efficient and effective. And 3rd, an analysis of an option instituting an ex officio role for the Ratepayer Advocate. Next slide. On access to information, there were 3 areas, or excuse me, a total of 4 areas. 1 is access to information. When accepting this position, I looked hard at the charter provisions on information, and I considered not taking the position because of the nature of the way it was framed in the charter. In particular, the standard statement in regulations since the railroad regulation developed in the late 1800s is specifically books and records access by the reviewing entity over the regulated entity. And we've had a history of challenges in receiving timely information, although things are much more responsive under the current DWP general manager. But we still have things that could appear, and we really have 2 standards we want to think about in this context. 1, my office has no authority to put an item on the agenda of the DWP board. So we have to have other procedures for handling anything that we might request. And 2, we have to look back at our experiences, and in particular the period of time that triggered the creation of this office in 2009 and 2010. How would this work if we were back in a period like that as we consider modifications? The administrative code modifications we recommend are clarifying the charter language to include the concept of books and records access. The CLA and CAO have expressed concern about how this process would work, although I contend the existing charter handles this. As part of the review and the development of ordinance language for this change, we would want to get DWP board and GM input on the information access clarification. Second area, office resources and hiring. The OPA is authorized for 7 positions, but only filled 4. We've been limited by our minimum budget, but the real limit is authority to fill vacancies with exempt positions, because we want to give whoever is the next ratepayer advocate flexibility to change the focus of the office when they come in. To handle this, there are 2 administrative code modifications, although they could be done by charter as well. First is to increase the OPA minimum budget from 0.25% to 0.5%, and this is the minimum number specified in the existing charter. Or first, that could be done by a change to administrative code, or it could be done by a charter change. There's no impact to the general fund because DWP reimburses the cost of the office to the general fund. And 2, as we think through this process, it's recommended that the CAO assist OPA in developing a flexible staffing plan and request for exempt positions. They have, for reasons of continuity and institutional histories, suggested we should consider possible civil service positions in the office. Next page. The third area is adoption of a reappointment process for the OPA. This portion of the report was not done with by me. It was done with some input by me, but it was done primarily by the CLA and CAO. The Charter and Administrative Code are silent on the number of terms for the ratepayer advocate, that is the Executive Director of the Office of Public Accountability, and they do not provide a process for reappointment. It's recommended that the Council instruct the CAO and CLA to work with the City Attorney to determine the best method for reappointment and to draft an ordinance establishing the necessary procedures. The final area is, should an ex officio position be created for the ratepayer advocate on the DWP board? This would be done by adding a seat to the DWP board for the ratepayer advocate in an ex officio role. All 3 offices do not recommend this approach because the ratepayer advocate's role as advisor to the board and also the council, also the mayor, also the neighborhood councils would conflict with being on that board. And the only potential benefit is more ready access to information. If the council wishes to pursue this option, a charter amendment is likely the only avenue.
Okay, what type of additional information would you like to have access to that you don't think you have access to now?
One, at the current time, we have a very good relationship in this process. We've received over 90% of our information in a short period of time, and it's really not a problem with the current board and the current GM. This is to allow, or actually by having this as a backstop, it hopefully will prevent the kind of problems regarding information access that occurred in 2009 and 2010. As an example that illustrates how time is important, in the rate review process, there were modifications to the rate proposal late in the process. We received our final version of the rates, the numbers for the rates, 15 days before we issued our report. So we were able to, on a cooperative basis, come to our final report very quickly, even though it was a very tight timeline from the final agreed to rates to the issuance of the report.
Okay, so if you want to try to get something on the agenda now, what's the process you go through? Because you mentioned you wanted to have some kind of ability to directly, without going to others, or anyway, I'll let you expand on that a little bit.
We have to have the cooperation of the board president to get something on the agenda. And it's a cooperative relationship now. We haven't asked for any items on the agenda, because we've been able to work out the information components now. It's just if there are a series of roadblocks now, there's no formal process for addressing that.
Okay.
Go back to 2009, 2010, and the situations that occurred in that period. Could we handle that? We would have to come to the council for support in some way.
Got you. So if we did give you a larger budget, what would we get for that?
As part of this rate process, we have specified a number of index reviews that occur in terms of DWP's performance versus rates and current budget over the next few years. That will be taking more time. During the middle of this rate process, we were stressed so that we weren't doing as in-depth reviews of routine capital spending and projects and contracts as we normally do. So we were running low on staff capability at that point in time.
You talked about exemptions.
Right now, we're entirely staffed, except for our administrative person, by exempt personnel. And if, when I leave, whenever that is, I think it's appropriate that the city
You
have
didn't read the fine print in your contract. You don't get to leave.
I'm sorry, I didn't
No, go
understand.
ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Fick. So anyway, getting back to the exempt positions.
It's to allow any new ratepayer advocate who comes into the role flexibility to redirect the whole
Gotcha.
office effort, similarly to the Ethics Commission or the City Attorney's Office.
All right, I got you. So, Mr. Harris Dawson?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Dr. Pico, just a quick question on the exempt employees. This has been a somewhat controversial issue across departments, but especially here in DWP. So the current arrangement that we have wouldn't allow you to come to personnel and ask for an exempt employee like someone does almost every week in that committee?
We've gotten our 4 exempt positions that we have 2 ways. One is in our enabling ordinance, we got the ability to designate 2 assistant general manager, deputy directors as exempt. And separately from the mayor's office, we got 2 exempt positions granted through the mayor's office. We would have to, as an interim way, other than a charter change, which is the hard way around, is get some additional exempt positions for the office. We're not part of DWP, so we go separately to the mayor's office for those. As far as DWP's exempt positions, given the fact that DWP is facing a number of technical transition challenges, we support them getting outside expertise and blood at many levels. So we support their getting more exempt positions.
Thank you.
You good? Mr. Santana, did you have anything to say related to this report?
The only thing I add is that as you look at changing the office, its functions, and its focus, there are certain changes that could be done to the charter and others that could be done through other means, including ordinance or administrative code. So as you proceed forward, it's important to distinguish those 2.
Okay, any other questions at this time? If I could get Dr. Pickle, all you guys to hang around. What I do want to say, before I forget, when we actually get hot and heavy into this, I want to thank everybody that participated in this process. Okay, you may not be pleased with the product, but I think that there's very little complaints could be made about the process. I think we did the very best we could to reach out to this great city that we represent. We did our very best. I think maybe it made history in the way that we incorporated the neighborhood councils into this discussion and into this debate. They were partners with us along with the mayor's office every step of the way. We went to 3 different regions within the city of Los Angeles and had evening hearings, not just a town hall, but actual committee hearings with all of the staff and the members. So this committee's proud of that, and this committee is very grateful to everyone who participated. So I do want to go on the record and say that. We're joined today by the general manager of DWP. So before, again, I'm going to get directly into the public comment, but I'd like to ask Marcy, maybe if you could just come up and indicate to us some of the challenges and, in your view, what you believe some of the fixes could be. Oh, and I also forgot to reference Mr. Fuentes. His motion, his document has been the working document that we have used throughout this process. Now, we are hopeful that today that we will create another document, that there will be a set of recommendations. Even as we are listening to you, we're talking about possible recommendations and amendments. But I do believe that it's important for us to put this committee set of recommendations out there so that they can be reviewed by the public. And they can be reviewed by city staff and by my colleagues, and so that they would be afforded time to give input, recommendations, and suggestions. So that is the hope, that we will get to that point before this committee hearing is over. But Marcy, appreciate you coming, and would like to kind of get your thoughts where it relates to some of the challenges that you face and some of the things that we can do to make it easier for you to do your job and help the department become a more efficient department. See, I'm not banging the department, because I know the folk over there, they work hard, and they're properly trained and they're committed. But maybe there's some structural things that we need to change so that they could be better, so that they could be more efficient. And I think that's what this is all about, trying to make the best department that we can make, not to suggest that your folk and that the rank and file people are not going above and beyond. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. I think it's important, just from the standpoint of framing, to bear in mind you're talking about an agency it's a $5 billion a year business, and it's totally ratepayer supported as opposed to taxpayer supported. Over the 2 years, as I was going through the rate setting process, I noticed that there were significant inefficiencies that basically artificially hold rates up, where reforms could result in savings for those ratepayers. Probably the 2 most prominent for me were in hiring practices and procedures and in contracts. As one example, right now we're limited to a 3-year cycle for contracts, whereupon the contract then comes to council. It is a lengthy process, and it's very uncertain in terms of time, and we found that a number of contractors were padding their bids to allow for changes in the market by the time we got through for approvals. Further, the 3-year time frame, we were starting over in the process before we'd even gotten the contract out. So there are enormous churning inefficiencies in our procurement cycle. My purchasing director made the comment this morning, and she's correct in that we're moving into a heavily technical area, and we're using Stone Age tools. So reforms in that area for contract size, for delegated authority, it will allow for 2 things. 1, it will certainly streamline the process, and 2, it will allow me to focus our board on the massive changes that are happening, particularly in the electric industry. There will be more change in the next 3 years than there's been in the past 10. And it's very important to get them focused on that and not these small, basically routine operational related purchases. So procurement reform is critical. On the hiring side, over the years, the civil service system is a very bureaucratic system. It's not necessarily to take a shot, but it's to say that it has so many multiple levels and procedures that it doesn't fit the needs of a business. And in fact, that's what DWP is a business. So I can't meet hiring surges. I can't meet the need. As an example, I need programmers desperately who are familiar with Java. There aren't any in the city, and there aren't any on the list. So it's artificially limiting to be able, I can't meet the business needs is the point I'm trying to make. Civil service does a good job to the extent that they're resourced, but what happens whenever there's a recession or reduction in their resources, they in essence slow down or stop hiring for DWP, but my business doesn't necessarily stop.
Mr. Harris-Dawson.
So sorry to interrupt, but I just had a question because you said something that I've had a lot of concerns about. So you just said you need programmers in Java, which makes a lot of sense. And then you said, but there are none in the city. So the city has like 40,000 employees. Is there, and maybe this is not a question for you, maybe it's a question for personnel. How do we know that no one among those 40,000 people knows Java?
Let me clarify. When a position like that opens up, it goes out for bid to the entire city. And then people put themselves, they say, I have an interest in that, and I want to be on that list.
So people have to self-select.
Right,
I got it.
right. They self-select.
Thank you.
Continue.
Those are probably my two main areas. There's structural ones. I think some of the recommendations potentially about expanding the board to have a broader range of candidates. I think some of those are very good ideas. But from an operational perspective, from a saving money perspective, the most valuable reforms for me are in hiring, being able to expedite it, being able to match the business needs with the candidate pool, and on the procurement and contracting side.
Okay. Thank you, and stick around if you will. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take comment from the public. We're going to do 1 minute. If you feel compelled to speak again, then fill out another card, and hopefully I'll be able to, time will afford us the opportunity to accommodate you as well. But if I could get the main players to stick around, because I want to hear from the public and then begin making a set of recommendations. So why don't we start off with Sean Mccloud. Please come forward, Sean. Yes.
Good morning. I'm Sean Mccloud, Assistant Business Manager with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. We are in support of the reform. IBEW Local 18 has the largest workforce on the DWP property. And so I'm here today on behalf of our membership. Not only have I worked for IBEW Local 18, but we have a program called the Utility Pre-Craft Trainee Program, which is a hiring program for going into the inner cities and giving employees and giving people in the community an opportunity to have jobs. Since this program, these are entry-level jobs that come into play. First of all, I do want to say that we have nothing against the personnel department as far as their employees. It's the process of hiring and being able to hire people quickly. In this program and going into the communities, we have people that have entry-level jobs. We have people that are now clerk typists. We have people that are maintenance laborers as a part of it.
Finish your thought. Finish your thought.
Okay. And the city has changed jobs where now a clerk typist, entry-level positions, they cannot have it. I can't go to my neighbor and say, become a clerk typist, because the city has made that now a promotional job that comes into play. They've downgraded the CSR position, which is customer service, and now they cannot compete for some civil service exams now. And those things need to change because those are our jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Harris-Dawson has a question. And again, Ms. Mccloud, if you want to speak again, you can fill out a card. Again, Mr. Harris-Dawson.
Thank you so much for indulging me, Mr. Chair, and thank you. And if you don't know this, it's fine. I'm just curious. For the pre-craft training program, what is the retention rate? Like of 100 people that come into that, how many of them end up with permanent jobs at the department?
So right now, we have, actually, we have, I think it's 67 that are now have permanent jobs since the program, the exception. We have we have 10 right now that have had job offers, and they will be starting in the next 2 weeks in the program. So the retention people is working, the process is working, that is coming into play, and we have them from clerical to a lot of entry-level field positions.
So
And
let's
they're
say
passing probation.
So let's say 77 out of how many?
We have 77 out of, we've had 125 in the program so far.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. If I could get Patrick Mack to come forward, please.
Good morning. My name is Patrick Mack, and I currently work under Department of Water and Power's Utility Pre-Craft Training Program, or its UPCT program. UPCT program hires directly from within our community, and without it, I would not have a job with the city. I tried a very long time to get a good job and was not able to. I now work under a program developed by International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 18, and Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and have a good job and plan to have a better job with DWP in the future. The program was the only option I had to work at the city because they are working with us and preparing us for permanent jobs. I had a troubled past with substance abuse, alcoholism, and turned my life around. I am so thankful for the department and IBEW for writing letters of support on my behalf when I was denied several times by city personnel due to my checkered background. I was recently offered a permanent position working for DWP as a warehouse and tool room worker, and I will start on the 13th of this month. I strongly support the CAO recommendation to let Los Angeles Department of Water and Power do their own hiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and continued success to you, Mr. Mack. You're a role model. Oscar Montalongo, followed by LaWanda Davis. Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. My name is Oscar Montalongo, and I'm proud to be here representing myself and fellow DWP co-workers. I've worked for the DWP for 16 years. I began my career as a helper, entered the electrical distribution mechanic training program, and I've been a journeyman for 11 years. I'm here today in support of the proposed changes for DWP hiring. DWP is the only department that has programs that have been successful in hiring from the community. We are committed to our community and strongly support the report to move hiring to DWP.
Thank you,
sir.
Thank you. So is Ms. Davis? Come on up, followed by Jessica Goodhart. Welcome, Ms. Davis.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is LaWanda Davis. I'm also known as LJ, and I'm proud to be here today representing myself and my coworkers from DWP. I've worked at DWP for 1.5 years as a clerk typist. I also came out of the UPCT program, and I was unemployed for 7 years at home, and without that program, I would not be here today. Unfortunately, I can't share the joy of sharing that with my neighbors and my family members, being able to take that clerk typist test, which allowed me to be able to take an open test and qualify to have the position that I have. Because of the city personnel department is changing the name for the clerk typist to administrative clerk, and not being open, now being promotional. Also,
Finish your thought.
I would like to say that I'm here today in the support of the proposed changes for DWP hiring. And again, DWP is the only department has serious programs and has hired from the community. Also, we are, as he said, are committed to our community and strongly support by the report to move the hiring to DWP. In closing, I just want to leave you these words of Woodrow Wilson. America is nothing if it consists merely of each of us. It is something only if it consists of all of us. So let's pay it forward and open the job opportunities back into the reach of the community for all of us. Thank you.
So as Jessica Goodhart makes her way down, I neglected to thank the business organizations, the Chamber, the VICA, CCA, the LA Business Council. I want to thank the environmental groups that came and weighed in, and as I think of other people, I want to thank them as well. I want to really highlight the two committees that are within the neighborhood council, the advocacy group, and the one that deals with the, I'm just having a mental block right now for coming in and actually presenting to this committee, so we're very appreciative. Ms. Goodhart, you're beginning to be a regular. So
Good
go right
morning,
ahead.
council members. I've spoken before, so I'm just be really quick. Just to respond, Councilman Harris Dawson, to your question about retention, Table 1 of the UC Berkeley report that came out last week has that information. I know that more than 90% are either still UPCTs or in permanent positions. It has a very high retention rate. This program is very successful. All I really want to say is that I believe the city should really move without delay. That we've asked again the Department of Water and Power to do a lot, meet ambitious renewable clean energy goals, which Lane supports, and also to rebuild our infrastructure and better serve customers, and we need to give them those tools. And there's nothing to prevent the department from recreating the benefits of civil service under a new hiring structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So if I could now get Teresa Sanchez and Victor Gordo to come forward. And whoever gets here first, it doesn't matter.
Mr. President, members of the committee, this is about accountability and control. This is about giving up the people's right to have their elected representatives have direct oversight of discipline, wages, work rules, all issues that are now public. All of that will be lost under the current proposal. You will have ceded control of the utility, one of the city's most important assets. I would also like to highlight the fact that the proposal, which is called enabling legislation, is really a deferral of what cannot be accomplished today. I don't believe that if the voters of Los Angeles were informed as to what you're giving up, that they would pass such a proposal. So practically and legally, the proposal is deficient. The people of Los Angeles deserve to know from their elected officials what exactly it is that you're seeking to remedy with charter changes. I applaud the workers who came here before you today, and that they're clear evidence that you don't need charter changes to accomplish what they have achieved. All of these changes can be accomplished administratively, and we ask you to look at that before changing the charter.
Thank you. Teresa, followed by Cheryl Parisi, followed by David Sanders.
Good morning. Teresa Sanchez, AFSCME District Council 36. Good morning, council members and everyone here and members of the public listening in. With all due respect to the general manager, I believe that the DWP is not a business, it's a public asset, and it has accountability to the public, and those jobs also are a public asset. I also believe that there's nothing in the charter that precludes or prevents a department working with personnel and with the employee organizations to flexibilize hiring, streamline civil service, just as we've done on the council side with our coalition agreement to restore services and create 5,000 jobs through targeted local hire by breaking down barriers to civil service and restoring services. I believe it's possible to do that, and I believe the UPCT program is an example of how that is possible and how it's been done successfully in the past.
Thank you. So if I could get Ms. Parisi, followed by Mr. Sanders, and then followed by Dr. Molly Rhodes.
Thank you. Good morning. We're here to say that the civil service system in the city of Los Angeles has served the city well. It has helped build a highly proficient and highly diverse workforce that assures that workers have the right to move where their merit takes them. It is an asset and must be highly valued. The stories of the workers that you just heard happened because of the rules of the existing civil service system, which allows for entry based on creating opportunities in communities, developing merit, and then allowing that merit and that competency to take you as far as you can go. That is a value that must be protected. We ask that you not alter the civil service system, but deal practically with some of the obstacles that have been articulated. For example, we would suggest that a special unit in the personnel department be created, in the city personnel department, be created to specifically serve the needs of the DWP hiring program. The personnel department has already undertaken succession planning with all of the other council-controlled departments. It can bring that skill and ability to the DWP to assist in succession planning and to be there as an added resource. I also want to speak to exempt. There are currently 183 available exempt positions under existing charter rules. We would encourage you to ask the DWP to begin to access those 183 vacancies to utilize for the special skills that they need. Thank you.
So I don't see Mr. Sanders. So if I get Dr. Alice Goff, followed by Sarah Rascon. Yes, it's you now. It's you,
Hi,
Doctor.
I'm not Alice. I'm Molly Rhodes. So David's on his way. Hopefully he'll be able to join us. I just wanted to say that SEIU 721 represents the security guards at DWP. You heard from them at the beginning of the process. The controller report that spawned much of this discussion talked about security issues. None of that's risen to the level of scrutiny and discussion. I'm not sure why. But the controller report noted that security does not have its own budget unit, and security is not supervised by security. They're actually supervised by an accountant currently. So you want to talk about personnel issues, let's go there. And then additionally, we represent managers in MOU 36 who frequently go back and forth between DWP, and they would be deprived of the right to go back and forth. I also want to say that the jobs in DWP are not sent out in a bid to the entire city. That's an MOU-specific issue to IBW. It doesn't happen for our members. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I can get Ms. Goff, followed by Ms. Rascon, followed by Tony Wilkinson.
Good morning, Alice Goff. I represent the Clerical and Support Services employees of AFSCME Local 3090. And our request is that you, in fact, not take away the promotional opportunities that are available to existing city employees. There's much praise to be given for the changes in how we hire. And I just want to correct the record on the last administration of the clerk typist. Well, the classification is now administrative clerk, simply to update the name and bring some professionalism to the class. It does not, in fact, prohibit anyone from coming into the classification. In fact, the last administration was specifically to pick up the existing part-time employees who had been bounced around with limited hours and no opportunity to gain benefits because of the hours that they were working. So we have been working hard to try to upgrade, professionalize the class, and bring more people into full-time benefited positions within the city. And we ask that you not take away the opportunity, as I said, to promote Thank you.
So thank you. So I want to get Ms. Rascone, Mr. Wilkinson. I see Mr. Sanders. So David, you'll come up. You'll be after Mr. Wilkinson. Yes, ma'am, and welcome.
Good morning, Sarah Ruscone on behalf of the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, representing over 1,600 business organizations spanning over 35 industry sectors. And we're here to offer our support to reform at the DWP. DWP, being a multi-billion-dollar public utility, has some of the lowest, most competitive rates in the state. As an acting business and utility, we feel that DWP is constrained to city rules and practices that prevent it from operating at its entire efficient capacity. After discussion, we would like to see reform to contracting and procurement policies, that they be improved, allowing the department more flexibility and independence, creating a more nimble and efficient procurement process. Reform to hiring procedures, the civil service program, allowing DWP independents to hire for jobs and positions requiring expertise, creating a competitive, skilled workforce. Also, reform structure to rate making. And lastly, we do not support a full-time board. Thank you for considering our position on reform.
Thank you. And as Tony approaches the microphone, I want to thank you. You've been with us every step of the way during this process, even when we sat down a late night in the mayor's office and tried to come up with a way to reach out to Angelino. So that's appreciated. And at your side every step of the way has been Deputy Mayor Romero, who is here today. So again, thank you for being an integral part of this process. With that said, Mr. Wilkinson, you're up.
I want to thank both you, Council President, and the Mayor's Office, Barbara Romero, Ted, all of you on behalf of the neighborhood councils of the City of Los Angeles, for including us all in this rapid but really critical process. I know that one of the key issues is the issue we're discussing now about hiring reform. I think it is so important that it needs to be dealt with, even though it's controversial, that I haven't found anybody, including myself, who's for abolishing civil service at the department. But I think it really is important that the charters say that the department is not necessarily having to use the city system. Because what that does is it triggers the meet and confer between the department and its labor partners to come up with a civil service system that can both protect jobs and match the needs of the department, including things like the pre-craft training program. And last thing I'd like to throw in is, if you initially in the charter give people a 10% exemption at the department, which is the county level civil service exemption, it will make an immediate change while these other meet and confer items are being discussed.
Well, thank you. So if I can get Mr. Sanders, followed by, I believe it's Lee Wallach or Lee Wallace.
Good morning. David Sanders, SEIU Local 721. I just want to speak on behalf and support and endorse what some of my colleagues have already spoken of. Our concern is we support reform, whatever that, in a form that's clear, definable, that's transparent. We would oppose, and I would oppose that a major change into our city governance, the Constitution, our charter. I advise us all to be cautious of that. I believe that there's ways of internally enhancing, improving efficiencies within the DWP and other city departments in terms of hiring, in terms of those processes. And we also have concerns about city employees on this side of the room, their ability to transfer and promote into the Department of Water and Power. So again, we are supportive of reform that's clear, that's concise, that's public, and that's transparent. Thank you for your time.
And that's fair. That's fair. So if I could get, I'm sorry, Lee. Come on up. You're the cleanup hitter for this phase.
All right. Thank you, Councilman. As you know, I'm representing Motor Avenue Improvement Association and Faith to Green. We've been in this room for many years. I've battled from Ron Deaton and actually a few folks before him on coal and other efforts.
True.
We have never seen a DWP like we have today. It's transparent, it's green, it's effective. This is a DWP that has really worked with the community. I know you gentlemen know this. I urge you Marcy's comments are right on. I urge you to work with Marcy, as you have with the community and others, to develop the kind of reforms that are needed. She's right, and believe me, I know contracting is tough. It takes forever. I've walked people through the process to get in and get a job. It is really difficult. We can do better as a city, and I know you'll make the right decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So if I can get CLA, CAO to return. Dr. Pickle, don't go too far. Now, basically, what we've, I want you to make some clarifications here, or make sure that I don't misunderstand your recommendations where it relates to the civil service. If we were to support what you are suggesting, in my opinion, it does not alter civil service, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want you to kind of walk us through, and then maybe Sharon, you can chime in as well. Well, because it seems like that's the hurdle. It seems like that's where we just have not been able to get consensus as of yet. So let's take a moment and talk about that.
Certainly. Our report looked at the challenges that the department presented regarding hiring and distinguished between those challenges that are as a result of the charter, as well as those that are a result of collective bargaining. And what we try to do is provide your council options based on the recommendation that Mr. Fuentes had initially was to eliminate civil service altogether.
Which we indicated that we just did not think that was more of a meat axe approach, and we asked you for
alternatives.
Yes.
And so,
in fact, at the first meeting we had, I remember asking you about that.
That's correct. So one alternative that your council could consider is to simply allow for amendments to be made to the civil service based on collective bargaining and making that specific to DWP employees. And so that would give the opportunity for the department to think through what their needs are as it relates to the challenges that they believe currently exist within the system, and put it in context of other issues that have already been negotiated through collective bargaining. Those, like every process, there would be a discussion between the affected unions and the management of the city, and then ultimately amendments would be allowed to proceed. And so to do so, you would have to allow an amendment to the charter that would establish that the salary setting authority may in fact waive the administration of all or part of the civil service standards provided in Article 10 of the charter for DWP employees, and that it would then be done through a process of collective bargaining. There is a minimum expectation that it obviously has to be in compliance with state and federal law pertaining to labor practices. In addition to that, you also asked us to look at the issue of exemptions. And again, the department has requested an increase of exempt positions just for their department. That would also be subject to collective bargaining. And as part of the process, if the charter would be amended to allow for changes to the civil services system to occur through collective bargaining, the issue of exemptions could be part of that change. And then the third thing we were asked to look at was to determine who ultimately is responsible for representing the interests of management through this process. And the council could adopt amendments or propose amendments to the voters to allow it to delegate the salary setting authority, not require, simply allow the salary setting authority to be delegated to the DWP board once that new board is created. And so what these options presented were simply the flexibility to make changes at some point. It doesn't require that those changes be made. It doesn't eliminate civil service. It simply gives the city the flexibility to make those changes into the future, in part being responsive to the concerns raised by the department and certainly issues raised by the OPA and the research that's been done to provide the city and the department specifically greater flexibility to respond to the demands of the market, the changes in the technology and in the industry overall.
Okay, but Sharon, before you weigh in, Mr. Weezer wanted to jump in.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And from your recommendations with respect to personnel, some of the speakers have suggested that we streamline the personnel department and make that personnel department more responsive to DWP needs, such as we have done with police officers, for example. They have a specialized unit that respond to the hiring of officers, and they've not only been able to streamline that, but they've created rules that more specifically address the needs of LAPD, given that at some point that was raised as an urgency in a matter that needed some changes in specialized care. So why did you consider that in your recommendations, or why wouldn't you have recommended that?
So, you know, we have spoken directly to the personnel department and the Department of Water and Power, and in fact there currently is a dedicated group of employees within the personnel department that are paid for by the DWP that are focused on the processing of hiring and examinations for the department. And we, even with these changes, even with, you know, the language, sort of the middle ground language related to the charter, even if they're adopted, we are still recommending that there be improvements made in how the two departments coordinate together. And my office has been facilitating a number of conversations. I think there's consideration of asking us to look beyond what can be done immediately to strengthen the processing within the current civil service rules. There should be assumption that the civil service system is the system that the department will continue to function with until something else is negotiated. So they still have to hire. They have very specific hiring needs today. And one of the things that could be considered that we've listed in our report was that there could be a memorandum of understanding or some kind of agreement between the two departments on the service levels that the DWP should expect, the time it takes to process exams, flexibility in particularly entry-level exams, and so that is also part. It's not either or, it's both.
Okay, but your recommendation is looking to not fix that within the current system, but you're abandoning that system and recommending a whole new structure. So you've given up on the existing structure and saying that's not working, we shouldn't try to strengthen that or fix that. That's because your recommendation is that you're abandoning that approach right now.
No, we're not recommending abandoning the civil service system, to be clear. Okay. There are challenges that the department faces in hiring that are some related to the civil service system. There are others that are a result of collective bargaining, and others that could be improved through just better coordination between the Department of Personnel and DWP. The one that's the quickest one to do is the last one, which is how to figure out how the two departments could work together, create a series of expectations, have them adopt a memorandum of understanding between the two, and so that DWP has a way of holding personnel accountable for a certain outcome. And so I think both departments are very interested in proceeding in that effort. And frankly, if that effort is successful, then the issue of amending the civil service system may not surface. I mean, so it's but right now the department is saying that beyond just improving that relationship, that they have identified changes that they would like to see in civil service. They don't have a list of what those are comprehensively. They would have to engage in collective bargaining to be able to make those changes ultimately, and ultimately would have to be presented here. And so that's going to take time. And so in the best case scenario, the discussion of civil service never really surfaces, because at the end they find ways to meet the needs of the department by an improved coordination. And so that's why we're recommending both, that there actually be, I think there's a recommendation to direct us to find a way to establish an agreement between the two departments to build a set of expectations so that things move quickly sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Harris-Dawson?
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you to everybody who's come and testified so far. One of the main points of concern that's been raised to me that I share some concern about, although I have empathy with both sides of the equation, is this business of transferring from the city department to the DWP, from any city department to the DWP. My mic is not working. My mic is not working. So the ability of workers to transfer from sanitation or any other city department into DWP, which many workers view as a really good opportunity because oftentimes the remuneration is much more beneficial at DWP. How does what we have before us as a recommendation impact that particular benefit, I'll call it? And does it not comment on it? Does it leave it open? And if it does leave it open, what would be the council's role in saying, yes, you can completely eliminate that benefit? Do we have no comment on it? Is it completely a DWP and board issue? Should that arise as one of the recommendations?
Well, under the current structure, the council would ultimately determine and approve the whatever MOU is established that amends civil service. The language to give the department and the city permission to make amendments to civil service through collective bargaining is simply that. It doesn't result in itself in an outcome. It doesn't change anything the day after. And so as part of the objectives that the team that will be working on looking at what amendments make sense, if the council establishes as its objectives to continue to allow for the transfer of city employees to the DWP, then that would be part of the instructions that it would give its management representatives to ensure that those transfers could still occur. And it would be the task of the negotiations to determine how they reach that direction, and then ultimately your council will make the final determination if that's been met.
Sharon, you want to weigh in? Or Ms. So, you want to weigh in?
Just to say that as part of this, some speakers mentioned that this language is enabling, well, another way of looking at it is that it's permissive, and that if ultimate negotiations as part of collective bargaining don't result in any changes, no changes will occur. So that's another way of looking at it. So with regard to all these additional personnel hiring issues, there are a number of them, yes, you are correct, there are a number of them that can be accomplished through ordinance changes, changes in civil service, or even amending some of the requirements for some of the classifications, having a dedicated personnel group for DWP. All of those can be accomplished without amending the charter. However, amending the charter does give you greater flexibility And again, it's only permissive language, so that's another way of looking at it.
Doesn't require the change.
Okay. I just had, and I understand you have to go.
I'll be right back.
Mr. CAO, is something important that you have to do right at this moment. So we just, or I just submitted a list of proposed recommendations that, Ms. So, I'd like for you to walk through. Also, you were just given a side-by-side that shows the Fuentes motion and his recommendations, and then the difference in what this committee would be recommending. So I don't know how you want to incorporate that into, how we move forward with these recommendations. But I also want to make sure that there are copies of all of the recommendations available for anyone that wants a copy. I want to make sure that we put it, in the event that we're successful with this vote, that it's placed on the website. And I want to make sure if there are any media folk that have absolutely nothing to do and they want something to read, that they are afforded an opportunity to get the document as well. But why don't we begin walking through the list of changes that we just gave you? And I will just say this, members, the leadership is not always easy, but we have a responsibility to lead. And if I've said this once, I've said it 100 times, that leadership is about taking people places that sometimes they don't think they want to go. And you don't lead by being at the back of the line. You lead by being at the front of the line. And one of the things, and I don't care, anybody can say what they want. I'm proud of this council. I'm proud of the fact that we don't duck serious issues, and this is a serious issue. I will indicate that there's a lot of heartburn where it relates to the conversation around civil service. That's why it was requested of the CAO, or indicated to the CAO, that we did not want to eliminate, that we wanted to create a conversation. And that, I think, is what the recommendation does. Another thing is what we discovered in traveling throughout the city and during every committee hearing is that the public wants to ensure that this council retains some level of authority over the Department of Water and Power, because in everything that we do, there needs to be checks and there needs to be balances. So I believe this gets us members to that place. So with that said, Madam CLA, why don't we begin talking about the recommendations? And again, also, I think what we're doing is we want to bring this to the full council floor so that all of our colleagues can participate in this conversation. You know, we started working from the Fuentes document. Now we will work from the Rules Committee document. So let us begin.
So, Mr. Chair, did you wish to start with this two-page document that you just
Whichever
passed out?
is more comfortable for you and whatever is easiest to explain.
So perhaps we should start with the original motion. So we just got this document, but I think we can address it rather quickly. With regard to the original motion from Councilmember Fuentes, one of the proposals was to replace the voluntary board with a 5 to 7 member full-time board. The proposed recommendations that are coming forward as put forward by you in this additional handout with the recommendations, proposed recommendations for the committee to take, would be to increase the size of the board to 7 members, and this would occur no sooner than July 1 and occurring no later than August 15th, and also requesting the city attorney to prepare a draft ordinance setting a stipend of $2,000 to be indexed by CPI for members of the board. The original motion also proposed that we would require board members to have a certain amount of expertise related to public utility management, environmental policy, and consumer advocacy. The proposed recommendations before this committee would require the board to have such expertise and actually expands upon some of the qualifications that were put forward in the original motion.
And I think, members, that is important. Yes, it's a good thing to have members of the commission that have actual hands-on experience where it relates to DWP matters, but I also think that there are leaders in this community that are neighborhood council members, community activists. They are individuals that have a background of just leadership, period. And I think one of the important things, especially where it relates to expanding the board, is maybe we can create a more diverse board, not just where it relates to the members, but their geographic locations and their diversity of background. So continue.
The next area was with regard to board members serving a full 5-year term as proposed in the original motion. The recommendation before you would establish a 3-year staggered term, and in addition to that, it would implement a much more difficult removal process for those board members. The proposal would be to require any board member who is removed to have not only mayor approval, but also council approval as well. And in addition, if the council were to remove, it would require a 3/4 majority for removal of that board member.
And members, that helps where it relates to the independence of the commissioners to give the residents and the rate players help them believe that their commissioners will be independent. And I think that that's the important thing where it relates to this proposed change.
The next area was to establish staggered terms, and that is the proposal before you. The motion also recommended establishing term limits. That is not put forward as a recommendation, limited to a 3-year term. I mean, that's something that could be considered, but it is not recommended to address term limits.
Well, where it relates to that, we know that whenever there's a new mayor, they're going to appoint whoever they think are the best qualified people to do the job. Plus, term limits is probably one of the biggest mistakes that we've ever made. But I do believe you will get a turnover based on every time there's an election of a new mayor of the city.
The next area proposed in the original motion was to determine a process for appointing or electing board members. The proposal before you would maintain the current process but implement that more difficult removal of any board member. The original motion also proposed removing requirements for city council approval and oversight over certain board actions. The proposal before you actually does implement a number of streamlining recommendations that would remove the council's approval over certain board decisions.
Why don't we talk about that for a minute?
Sure.
Why don't we talk specifically about some of those recommendations?
So if I can direct your attention to page 2 of the original handout that you distributed, we talk about board independence, and under the existing charter there are a number of areas where council approval or council ordinances are required, and so one area that this proposal would eliminate is requiring ordinances for the approval of power contracts, as well as removing an ordinance requirement for the use of competitive sealed proposals for design build contracts. Also, the charter does specify that in the granting of franchises, concessions, permits, licenses, and leases for the board, that any term in excess of 5 years would need to come to the council. What's proposed before you is to eliminate that as well. And in addition to that, the charter does limit the board's ability to approve long-term contracts. The proposal before you would provide for a definition of what long-term is, and so any of those long-term contracts would actually be approved by the board and would not require any further council approval. There is also the issue of rate setting. Rate setting would change under the current charter. Rate setting is done by ordinance, so requiring council approval. The proposal before you would actually set forward a process where the DWP would present a 4-year strategic plan, and as long as any of the rate setting or any of the rates proposed are in line with that strategic plan, that the rate setting would not need to come forward to the council. It would actually stay with the board. If there is anything that's over and above or beyond that 4-year strategic plan, then that would come to the council for approval.
And the council would be empowered to 245.
The council will always have the ability to 245. The 245 authority allows you to assert jurisdiction over it of any board action, but that does not allow you to act in its place. The only authority that the council would have is to disapprove the item or approve the item, and in the case of a disapproval, to send it back to the board for further consideration.
Okay, and then as we, if we're successful in moving forward, we hope to have language that creates a process that we work with the department, the commissioners prior to, where there can be a review and recommendation process by this council, and then where they would have the ability to take some of what we suggested and come up with a policy and send it. So it gives us an opportunity to, I think, better be part of that conversation without slowing things down.
I believe that is one of the recommendations that's contained in here. I think it's in the back, but
okay.
It does set forward that process. It would
that
process would be established by ordinance.
All right, Mr. Huizar.
Thank you. And this department, as there exists in other departments, is there like a certain amount of a contract, dollar amount, that requires council approval? Would some of that remain, or is that we're just pulling out some specific types of contracting that will no longer have council review, but the dollar amount will have to come to council? Those are still in place, correct?
Yeah, it's actually both. So there are, so let's talk about the dollar limitation, and that's also included in this handout as well.
There's other revisions to that as well? Okay, I didn't see that. Okay.
Look at recommendation 11, starting at number 11, under departmental independence for the non-charter required actions. You'll see some changes relative to contract limitations and the issue of contracting requests and so on.
And therein lies my question, which is, so for example, power contracts, irrespective of the dollar amount, the council will have no oversight over those. Is that the way it will be written?
Well, no, the council will still have 245 authority. So,
okay, so aside from 245, but irrespective of the dollar amount that any other contract would be subject to, well, a few here that are being pulled out, power contracts would not be subject to council review, irrespective of the dollar amount.
Actually, I could probably direct that to city attorney, because if there is a longer term, then it might require to come back to council.
Or over the 5 million.
Correct. Reith Trivedi from the City Attorney's Office. The recommendations that I see before me, if a contract is over $5 million, this is an ordinance that currently exists in the charter that sets the limit at $150,000 for contracts of the department that must come to the council. The proposal here is to increase that to $5 million for all contracts. Certain contracts of a higher value, those would have to go to the board, the $5 million contracts. subject to 245 if it's over $15 million. So power contracts, at least under the current proposal, if they're of that value, would still be subject to council approval through that method. But that's one of the elements for discussion.
Okay, thanks.
One
But you may want
important
to take,
point.
you may want to take a moment, and where it relates to section 11 or item 11 or what have you, and compare that with some of the other utilities. This section where it talks about the 5 million, the 15 million, if you were to compare that with other general managers and other boards, it's right in line.
Yes, for outside agencies, I think we did have a number of studies for other utilities where this is in line. These amounts are in line with the authority of those other utilities. In the city, these lower amounts are in effect for all of our other proprietary departments. So this would be carving out expanded authority for DWP.
And some of these other jurisdictions where it's comparable to or smaller than our utility, plus our current limit or our general manager had an ability up to what, 125, 150,000? 150. Okay.
So, but one important point to make is that with the expanded authority for the general manager, and this relates to the 245 authority, that if with the higher amount for the general manager, if the general manager approves it, there wouldn't be ability for council to 245 it because it would not be a board action. So that is something to keep in mind.
So continue.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Mr. Weezer.
And the reason I think this is important is because if the council is still setting policies and goals and has a role in that, or if we play a role in that, and there's these large amounts of investments going on in a certain area, we have to see if those large amount of investments, irrespective of particulars of the contract, they go through the council to verify whether they fit with the policies and goals that we feel the DWP should be going. So power contracts, are we investing more in renewables? Are we investing more in solar powers? Or what direction are we going? If we're not matching the oversight of the contracting with the policy and objectives and goals that the council will hopefully start playing some role, there's a mismatch there, right? And I don't know, I haven't seen the rest of these recommendations. I just want to point that out, that there's got to be some ability to oversee that the expenditures that are being made by the department coincide with the policies and goals that we're setting.
Well, another thing to keep in mind is that with regard to DWP, $5 million here in the city is very different than $5 million at DWP, just because of the size of the utility, the amount of revenues generated. It's a very different type of organization. It's not like a typical general funded department. So that's another thing to keep in mind, that it's not exactly apples to apples with us as it is with them. A $5 million contract may be considered a smaller contract at DWP. So that's another consideration as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, continue.
Going back to this two-page chart, we talked about the removal requirements for city council approval of certain oversights. So we touched upon that. The next area was authorizing the board to hire its own legal counsel. The proposal before you would request the city attorney to, in consultation with the board, to report on the oversight of litigation and strengthening that, as well as recommending that representation of the DWP be maintained for city attorney. So the city attorney would remain legal counsel for the DWP under the proposal before you.
And one of the reasons for that recommendation is because as we went through the process, what we discovered is that there was really not a problem with that. So we do want to make it easier for them to function, but why do we need to create a fix if we haven't really been able to identify a problem? So again, continue.
The next area was the motion proposed that the board be able to hire its own budget and policy advisors, similar to CAO, CLA type function. The proposal before you would do just that. It would create a DWP analyst office to provide independent policy and fiscal analysis support for the board and at the direction of the board. What would be proposed is that the executive director itself would be exempt from civil service and would be hired by the board, and that executive officer have the ability to appoint the positions in that office. The board would be required to establish a budget for that office, hire and set salary for the executive officer position, and authorize the executive officer to hire those positions. The next area was, and we discussed this extensively already, but to authorize the department to oversee its own hiring functions and removing DWP from civil service rules. So we had a very long discussion. This, as we discussed, would be permissive language to allow those discussions to take place. Ultimately, if nothing results from those discussions, the existing civil service would remain in place. There's also an instruction here to have CAO, CLA, and Personnel Department to report back on a hiring plan to address specific needs of DWP, and also to have a draft MOA that has specific performance metrics as it relates to the performance of personnel in providing those services to DWP and hiring the positions for DWP.
Well, see, I think that's critical, and we did touch on it earlier. I mean, if we move forward and we do the first part, that's not going to happen tomorrow. That would take constant negotiations and conversations, which does not solve the problem. But with a conversation between our DWP and personnel, that we can put things in place and hopefully make shifts that could immediately have a difference on the hiring and the speed and what have you. And if we are successful, and that's why I'm really going to keep an eye on this, and something that I've been talking about since the very first hearing, if this is successful, then there won't be a need. And that's why this is important. So that's one of the reasons, members, why that language is there, and it's serious language, and we anticipate that we're going to get results, or we better get results. Continue.
And the final area was the motion proposed that the city cap the transfer to the Proposition 26 level. The proposal before you recognizes the ongoing litigation as it relates to that, and so the request is to have the city attorney report to the city council with ongoing updates, including options to modify the transfer or otherwise resolve litigation.
Okay, now also, aren't there a series of, and this can be handed out, but a series of report backs and things of that nature, requests that other members of the council may have had when we brought this item before the council a week or so ago, and so we can talk about those. Where it relates, excuse me, to the transfer, it's a very, very important issue, and I think we need to be very careful in how we proceed, and we're going to do something to address it. But maybe you could explain that even if we were to act on that today, I mean, we could not even place it on November's ballot. So that gives us more time to look at this from a legal perspective.
Yes, so the reason why, if there is a desire to put, if you were to move forward to put something on the November ballot, the only thing that can be placed on November ballot are special taxes. You couldn't place a general tax. There had been some discussion of resolving that Prop 26 issue as a tax issue, and the only way to place a general tax measure would be on a municipal election ballot. So if there is some discussion of moving to a November ballot, you're correct, we would not be able to place it
So
on this ballot.
the soonest we could put this on legally because of state rules and regs would be March of the next, or
Next year.
whenever is the next election cycle, which is March of 20. But it is important that we continue the conversation on this issue, and we will do that. And with that said, is there?
Well, we've gone through this. If there are any specific questions as it relates, or we can walk you through the recommendations that were passed out as part of the 6 or 7 page handout. We addressed many of them already, and we can go through them quickly if you'd
Why
like.
don't you walk us through that, and then I have a couple of public comment cards. And then it'll be open to the members.
Okay, so the recommendations before you would be to request the city attorney to, with the assistance of the CLA, the CAO, the chair of the Rules Committee, to prepare the necessary election ordinance to place this ballot measure before the voters in the November 2016 general election that would amend the charter to provide governance and management of DWP, and the ballot measure would include the following elements. So this recommendation handout has a series of 23 recommendations. Number 1 would be the one that's specifically related to charter, and then number 2 through number 23 would deal with non-charter ordinance or other instructions that would be implemented to improve the management and streamlining DWP. So with regard to the charter recommendations, the first area would be for board structure. The proposal we talked about would be to increase the size of the board to 7 members, 3-year staggered terms, provide qualifications that no board member be a registered lobbyist, with the city, require that board members meet the requirements of Charter Section 501D, which relates to being a registered voter, and also maintaining diversity of the board, requiring that board members have a certain experience in the following areas as specified in utility management, water and power policy and operations, neighborhood council, community organization, business, finance, et cetera, and also authorizing the council to establish by ordinance the stipend. And with regard to removal, this would be similar to an ethics commissioner, whereby a board member would only be able to be removed with mayor approval and council approval, or in the case of council, with a 3/4 vote of the council. The next area relates to the general manager. The proposal before you would actually implement an appointment process of a general manager. This process mirrors somewhat the appointment process for the chief of police, whereby a number of names are provided to the mayor for selection, and the mayor can put forward one of those names or ask for additional names from the board. The board would actually make the recommendation. Personnel would provide those names to the board, and that would come to the mayor for ultimate appointment and approval by the city council. Under the area of board support, this would provide the independent analysis that has been requested. This would allow the executive officer, the DWP, to be hired, appointed by the board, and authority for the filling of those positions would be at the discretion of the executive officer. The board would establish a budget, hire and set salary for the executive officer, and once again authorizing the executive officer to hire those positions. In the area of the Office of Public Accountability, the ratepayer advocate, the proposal before you would actually increase the minimum budget of the OPA as established under the charter. The minimum amount now today is 0.025% of the revenues from the sale of water and electric energy for the previous fiscal year. This would increase the percentage to 0.5% and 0.05%, and this would allow the OPA to hire additional positions. You heard the OPA indicate that right now they are limited by budget, by the amount of revenues provided, and so this would allow them to hire those additional positions. The charter would also be amended to provide for a reappointment process, which is currently not specified for the executive director today. This would provide for a second 5-year term without the necessity of convening a new citizens committee for that appointment. And the next area relates to department independence, and we talked about the contracting authority already, so I won't go into that again. And we also talked about the rate setting authority as well. The next area would authorize the council to request any informational reports for review from DWP to ensure that the council has access to whatever information it deems necessary to help the council in evaluating anything related to DWP, as well as establishing any policies here that we may wish the DWP to consider as they move forward on the operation and of the DWP. And the final area there would be also to provide that any contracts less than the amount set by ordinance would not be subject to 245. This is a greater authority and independence that would be provided to the board. Anything that is before the board today would be subject to 245 by the council. This proposal would establish a limit, so as long as it was below the limit set by ordinance of the city council, then the council would not have the ability to assert jurisdiction over that. The next area relates to the personnel and hiring. We talked extensively about that, so perhaps I'll just skip over that one. Monthly billing, this proposal would require DWP to implement a monthly billing cycle. As you know today, the DWP billing cycle is every 2 months, and this would establish a monthly billing effective on January 1.
Of what year?
I'm sorry, 2020. And then we go into the non-charter recommendations. You want me to continue, Patty, or do you want to go into the non-charter? Okay.
So in the non-charter recommendations, again, we start with the board structure. These recommendations here are tied to the approval of the ballot measure that then allows for the ordinances to implement the actions encompassed in the charter change, including the setting of the stipend and the schedule of transition to the new board members in staggered terms, should those be approved. The next section is for the general manager, and again, this is the ordinance that would then allow the board to set the compensation and adjust it for the general manager, subject to the consent of the Executive Employee Relations Committee. The next group of recommendations is related to OPA, and that is to work with the city attorney, with OPA and DWP, to prepare and present a draft ordinance relative to OPA's access to appropriate and necessary documents. Also instructing CAO and CLA with city attorney and OPA to report back on the role of OPA and DWP, excuse me, and any potential changes to the role that could be defined by ordinance. And finally, on the adoption of the ballot measure, request the OPA with the assistance of the CAO to prepare a hiring plan, as well as requests for any additional civil service exempt positions that would come forward through mayor and council. Next section is on just the city attorney, and that's a request to the city attorney in consultation with the board to report back on the role of the board oversight of litigation pertaining to DWP, as well as recommending any potential changes to that oversight that could be strengthened through ordinance, while continuing to maintain the representation of DWP by the city attorney. The next section is on personnel and hiring. This goes back to the direction to our office, CLA personnel and DWP, to report back on a plan to address the hiring needs including resources and board approval of budgetary allocations, and the draft MOA with the performance metrics, which we had previously discussed. It also requests the EERC to issue bargaining instructions to DWP with the assistance of CAO and personnel to begin negotiations with the bargaining units in order to amend MOAs and letters of agreement relative to expediting hiring and promotion practices. The next section of recommendations are to departmental independence. Again, these are enabling ordinances for changing the contracting authority limits. That's in number 11. Number 12 is the direction for the ordinance for the quarterly reporting on contracts pending from the GM to City Council. 13 discusses the need for the ordinance that allows the board to enter into contracts with council's affirmative approval from the 3 years to the 5-year, from 3 years to a maximum term of 5 years. It would also allow the board contracting authority up to 10 years without council approval for specialized construction equipment or software that is offered by only one vendor. Otherwise, they would need to come to mayor and council. Number 14 is upon adoption of the ballot measure that the city attorney provides the ordinance that eliminates the requirement for power contracts and design build to be done by ordinance. Number 15 is requiring the city attorney to present the ordinance to allow DWP to engage in RFPs or competitive negotiation for the purchase of specialized equipment that uses price or other evaluation factors. 16 is again tied to the ballot measure and would request city attorney to prepare and present an ordinance that establishes timeline, procedures, and requirements of the 4-year strategic plan or the strategic investment and revenue requirement plan. 17 is a request to the mayor to exempt DWP from Executive Directive 4 or to modify and revise the executive directive in consultation with both CAO and DWP. And then 18 is instructing the CAO with CLA and DWP to report back on options that allow the board to assume all collective bargaining responsibilities with regard to DWP bargaining units. The next recommendation is relative to the power revenue transfer, which we've briefly discussed, and it's just the direction to the city attorney to report on updates and options. And then the final group is just other recommendations, speaking to looking at the report back and analysis on creating a fully integrated water group that would involve the Bureau of Sanitation, along with DWP, CLA, and CAO. Requesting DWP with City Attorney, CLA, and CAO to report back on options to reduce the financial liability of rec and parks, nonprofit entities that provide publicly accessible open space, as well as low-income seniors with respect to electricity and water rates. Another report back is requested from DWP with CAO and CLA on recommendations that will ensure access to clean energy solutions which are equitable and participation that is not limited by geographical location or household income. And then requesting DWP, again with CAO and CLA, on the potential of creating an executive level position that would ensure the interests of underserved low-income customer market segments as addressed across all DWP programs. And then the final recommendation is really technical corrections, allowing the city attorney with CAO, CLA, and the chair of rules election of the Rules Committee to make technical modifications or legal corrections to the draft election ordinance, draft resolution, draft ordinance requests, and any other related actions, basically to further the intent of these recommendations and council as approved.
Thank you. I want to say that if you look at all of the suggestions and recommendations, they are I would love for this committee to take total responsibility for coming up with each and every one of them, but that would not be accurate. These are recommendations, again, from the Bank Alliance of Valley Neighborhood Councils. It's from LANC. It's from business. It's from the chamber. It's even from some labor partners. It's from this committee. It's from the mayor's office. So basically what you have here is a combination of recommendations that we took very seriously and it tried to come up with a comprehensive package. I also believe that as we've gone through today's presentation, even though there is a lot of work that has been done in creating this document, I think that it shows that this is not the end of the process, that this is a work in progress, and there's many other things that we're going to have to continue to do. So with that said, I want to defer to see if Mr. Weezar or you want to jump in, Mr. Weezer? In fact, let me get two, if I can. Let me get rid of, if I can get Mr. Gordo and Ms. Parisi to come forward. You guys hang around. Go right ahead.
Thank you. With regard to item P, we're asking that you reject item P. Whether you call it permissive or deferral is irrelevant. The issue is clarity to the voters. What are the voters giving this council or future councils to do? And what they're giving under item P, not knowing the authority that they're giving to this council or future councils, they're giving you the authority to alter the civil service system for the utility. And that alteration ultimately affects the rights of residents, current rights of residents under the charter to participate in the civil service system. And it also is asking them to waive the protections afforded to them by the civil service system as taxpayers, as ratepayers, and as residents of the city of Los Angeles. And so that's why item P is legally deficient. Because the voters don't understand that, you're not explaining that to them. So we would ask that you reject recommendation P and go forward with changes in the MOA as found later in the recommendations. We believe that the MOA can achieve a lot of the hiring changes that are desired by both personnel and the utility.
Thank you. So if I could get Ms. Parisi followed by Mr. Humphreyville.
Thank you. I just want to concur with Brother Gordo's statements. Let me say the recommendations 9 and 10 under non-charter recommendations set forth an excellent framework and path to begin to rectify many of the issues that have been articulated. That is a proper and prudent procedure. P, eliminating civil service provisions for the DWP from the city charter is a rush to judgment. It is not a prudent move. And moreover, you will be asking voters to vote on the outcome of which is uncertain and unknown. It is important to take time to implement recommendations 9 and 10, and if necessary, this matter can be revisited in the future. We are in a constant process of review and improvement. We would ask that you hold on item P today and send the rest of the package forward as charter amendments. Give time for rules 9 and 10 to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Humphreyville.
Before I start, could we get a copy of the side-by-side comparison?
We'll give you a copy of everything that we have.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I'll see that that occurs.
Okay. I'd like to speak about the personnel department. We're asking the management of DWP to be responsible for what goes on there. And I think as a result, we need to give them the authority. Listening to what people were talking about civil service and all the personnel things, the city unions, I have no clue what the hell is going on there. I mean, it just sounds overly complicated. From my perspective, if you want an efficient organization, you need to give the department the authority and assume the responsibility for its hiring department. The personnel department is not responsible to the DWP management. It's responsible to the mayor. You have divided authorities, and therefore you're going to have divided loyalties. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, that concludes public comment. I'd now like to call on Mr. Weezar.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, let me thank you and everyone involved in moving this discussion forward. A very timely discussion, not only for this department, but any department in the city deserves an overall review as to the governance and what is working and what's not working. And this certainly has done that for us. I understand that this is a continuation today of a discussion. There are still other opportunities for us to provide our input on the proposals for today. The one area that I think on my end I'm going to continue to examine is whether, and I do believe that this council should not be as involved in the micromanagement of contracting at DWP, but I need to make sure that the different pieces that we're putting together allows the council to oversee large expenditures by the DWP, and so far as we are providing additional direction, it seems here every 4 years, to make sure that we get a plan together that is helping us as a city move forward in determining the direction of DWP. My main concern is that we've done a very good job overall in the last few years to move towards alternative forms of energy, and we've made some huge investments in that area, and we need to continue to do so. But if we as a city want to continue on that path, we need to make sure that the expenditures are going in that direction and that we achieve those stated purposes. So there's several moving pieces in here. I think that needs further examination as to whether they fit in place with each other. I saw a couple of conflicts that may not be conflicts, but I'll discuss those with the people who put these suggestions together, the CLA and the CAO. My other area of concern is the proposal on the civil service. I have some uneasiness with moving toward a direction that is still uncertain to me as to what the outcome of that will be and what that will mean for any future collective bargaining and existing and future employees. This is new language that I've seen, but it is something that I'm not quite sure where that will take us. So I'm uncomfortable with that, but I understand that today we'll be back and gives us another opportunity to discuss this in full with the council. So I support the proposals before us, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, Mr. Weezar. And I do think, and I'm going to call on Mr. Harris-Dawson in a second. I think what we will do is we'll create a document that will be in the public domain, and anyone that has any recommendations or suggestions, send it to us immediately. The council will again have a conversation about this on, I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, so that gives you time to review. But let's be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Give us real recommendations and suggestions. With that said, Mr. Harris-Dawson.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and everybody who's been involved in the process. This has been a great, so far this has been a great process to be involved in. Change this big is very, very hard, and the easy thing to do is to stand pat because we're uncertain about what the future will bring. I think the one overall concern I would register with regard to what we have before us is to really dig deep and think about whether or not we are anticipating and building the department we need for 20 years from now, as opposed to trying to fix the department from 10 years ago or fix the department we have now. I just would really press all of us to think about the future, the kind of city we want to have, and the department, the kind of department that we need to facilitate the future we want to build.
Well, thank you. And again, for those of you that any final recommendations, Marcy and your people, Labor and your people, you should huddle, and whatever you can get to this committee, get it to us as quickly, and I'll try to see that it's incorporated in the conversation that we have this week. Same with you, Mr. Humphreyville, and your concerns. So with that said, without objection, I move that we approve the recommendations, and I'm going to schedule this for Monday, if I can get your support. So without objection, Tuesday. I just gave us an extra day of work. Yeah, Tuesday. So, so without objection, that'll be the order. Do I need to clarify anything, Mr. Clerk? Or do you have it?
No, sir.
There is no more business before this committee. This committee is adjourned. Thank everybody again. Thank you all so much.